Welcome to the channel, English Epics. Elspeth left again. And once more, I was alone. Over the past few years, she seemed to visit our daughter Sharon more frequently. Sharon and Elspeth got along far better when alone than Sharon and I ever did. I never understood why, when Sharon was little, I treated her like a princess. In fact, I spoiled her. I think that was my big mistake. I tried too hard. When she was about 16, our relationship seemed to fall apart while her bond with her mother improved. From then on, they were inseparable whenever they had the chance that I never really understood what happened or what I did wrong. Although I grew up in Chesterton, I never truly liked the place. That's why I lived 100 kilometers away from it. Then my daughter Sharon and her family still lived there. All I had left were bad memories of my old hometown. Then my time in school was best forgotten that I wasn't geeky enough to fit in with the nerds, not athletic enough for the jocks, and not attractive enough to join the popular crowd, that I was one of those invisible kids. Elspeth, of course, was one of the most popular girls. The kind I couldn't even say hello to that. I watched her from a distance, never expecting to get close to her or any of the girls in her group. She was dating one of the athletes, Bobby Kistler, until he left town to attend college that I enrolled at the local community college around the same time, and that's where I met Elspeth. She was taking some courses in dietary management while I was enrolled in a 2-year program to become an accountant. I won't bore you with the details, but a year later, when Elspeth found out that Bobby was engaged to a girl from his college, we started dating. The following year, we got married that I was too naive to realize I was being used and too thrilled by my own luck to care. Guys like me don't end up marrying girls like Elspeth. Shortly after our wedding, my son Rob was born, and later, my daughter Sharon. Speaking of Rob, he lives in Colorado now, why relationship with Rob ended up being much like the one I had with Sharon, that I had always been a good father and tried to be a friend to my children, but the relationship started to deteriorate around the same time as with their sister. Whatever I did seemed to upset them, or at the very least turn them against me. That, as I mentioned earlier, I had no idea why that we stayed in Chesterton until both kids finished high school. Rob left town immediately. Sharon married her childhood sweetheart and stayed there. That I was offered a great opportunity to work in Nashville, and I jumped at it. Elspeth came with me, but she kicked and screamed the whole way. Elspeth and I had been married for about 15 years when Bobby Kistler returned to town. That he had married his college sweetheart and moved back to take over his father's business. Elspeth was both happy and upset about his return. That I think she was glad he came back, but not thrilled about his beautiful wife, and she really was a beauty. The 4 years after his return were tense for me. That my relationship with Elspeth began to deteriorate, and around the same time, the children started to drift away from me. One strange thing I remember was that Sharon seemed to grow closer to Elspeth, while Rob distanced himself from both of us. That I was an accountant. I hated it when things didn't add up. The following year, I was planning to surprise Elspeth with a trip to Italy for our 25th anniversary. The last 5 years in Nashville had been miserable. That I thought she'd enjoy living in such a wonderful city, but all she seemed to want was to go back and see Sharon. She never once mentioned traveling to Colorado to visit Rob and his family. That I too felt like she spent more time with our daughter than with her husband. The first thing she would do upon returning home was start planning her next trip. The only good thing about Elspeth's trips to Chesterton was that she never tried to convince me to go with her. That suited me just fine. Them, my parents had moved to Florida, and my only connection to Chesterton was through the internet. Every day I would log in to check if someone had died. That I know that sounds a bit morbid, but I got a strange satisfaction from it. On Friday morning, I got an unexpected call from Sharon. She rarely called. Me, especially when Elspeth was with her. Dad, we have a small problem. Mom fell and broke her ankle. Damn. How did that happen? Is she okay? She's fine, Dad. Last night she tripped over the dog and broke her ankle when she landed. You don't need to worry or rush over here or anything like that. Mom will stay with US until the doctor clears her for travel. I'll take her home and then head back. All right, if you say so. How long do you think that'll take? Probably 2 or 3 weeks. She's on sedatives right now, but I'll ask her to call you once the medication wears off. Are you sure you don't need anything? How are you going to cover the doctor's bills? Our insurance will take care of it. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Sharon hung up and I sat for a long time, deep in thought. Something felt off, but I couldn't figure out what exactly that. I sat down at the computer with a cup of hot coffee and started browsing my obituaries, that as usual. All the deceased were strangers to me. For some reason, instead of closing the obituary page, I clicked over to the local news. Funny how your life can change with just one simple click. The headline read, "Local resident dies in house fire." The story turned out to be even more interesting. Robert Kistler died early in the morning in a fire that was apparently caused by a faulty space. Heater demur. Kistler passed away in his bedroom from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by the fire. Another resident of the house suffered a broken ankle when she jumped from the second-floor porch roof. The injured woman was transported to the local general hospital by the Keystone Rescue Unit that I found it curious that they didn't mention. The other resident's name, only stating that it was a woman. The rest of the article was general background information about Bobby Dog. It mentioned that his wife, Audrey, had died of ovarian cancer about 4 years ago. It took me less than a minute to find the phone number for the Keystone Rescue Unit. Hello, this is James Pearson. I understand my wife was injured last night, and you guys helped her. I'd like to know how much we owe you and how I can arrange payment for the services. It was a risky move, hell, I could even be wrong, but what did I have to lose? I figured they'd be more than willing to give me the information. Since I was offering to pay, I assume you're referring to Elspeth Pearson, correct? Yes, that's right. How much do I owe you? And where can I send the check? Or do you take credit cards? Mr. Pearson, it looks like you're off the hook. Sharon Dietrich has already paid the bill in full. That's my daughter, so I guess everything's taken care of. Absolutely. Thanks for calling, and we're glad we could help. That pretty much confirmed the collusion between my wife and my daughter. All those trips back and forth were just so Elspeth and Bobby could be together. The fact that my daughter apparently knew about it and agreed to help made it even more painful. It would be hard for me to forgive her. I had no idea how long Elspeth had been seeing Kistler, but I suspected it started not long after his wife died, which was right around the time we moved to Nashville. Coffee was replaced by a cold beer that I needed to think. Something still didn't add up. Sharon and Elspeth had started acting strangely close long before we moved to Tennessee. There was something I was missing. Rob was supposed to get home from work in about 2 hours that we hadn't talked much in the past few years, but I felt the need to connect with him a bit. Maybe he could help fill in a few of the blanks that I never did finish that beer. The next time I took a sip, I started to feel hot. Truth was, I didn't need a beer right then that I sat there for 2 hours, reflecting on my marriage. And speaking of marriages, they all seemed pretty lousy. That, of course, the only things I had to compare mine to were my parents' marriage and what I saw on TV. Elspeth kept a good home and was an excellent cook. She never refused me sex, but over the past few years, I hadn't been very interested. That it wasn't about the physical part. It was about the emotional connection that should come with it, that I still wanted sex, still needed it, but I no longer found Elspeth sexually attractive. Seemed we had never truly been connected. And now I understood why that I didn't see her affair as a disaster, more like an opportunity. Her affair actually helped me make sense of why we had grown apart now. That Bobby was dead, I was a bit puzzled as to why she didn't want to come home as soon as possible. But I figured she realized that the longer she waited, the less likely I was to piece everything together, the longer she could hide the fact that she broke her ankle at the time Bobby died, the better her chances of keeping it from me that it was time to make a call to Colorado.Rob. It's Dad. Hey. Listen, sorry to bother you, but I was hoping you could help me with a few quick questions. Sure, Dad. What exactly do you need to know? His voice didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. Rob, a few years ago, when you and Sharon were younger, we all seemed to get along much better. Then suddenly, everything went sideways that I was never able to figure out what happened. What caused you two to change? Can you share anything with me? I'd really like to understand. I heard an annoyed sigh on the other end of the line. I don't know, Dad. I guess we all just drifted apart. Sharon and I were going through those rough years, you know how it is. I realized this was going to be a dead-end call, so I figured I might as well wrap it up and start looking for answers elsewhere. All right, Rob, if that's all you've got, I'll let it go that I just found out that your mother's been cheating on me for several years, that I was just wondering if it might have had something to do with the family falling apart. I don't understand. It's not that complicated, Rob. Infidelity, betrayal, breaking marriage, vows dotted shouldn't be too hard to grasp. No, Dad. That's not what I mean. You said you just found out. What does that mean? That's pretty simple, too. I only found out this morning that your mother has been having sex with her old boyfriend for several years. Shit, that little creature. She set me up. Do you want to explain what you mean? It happened many years ago when we were still in high school. One day, Sharon and I came home early and found my mother having sex with a guy in your bedroom. I ran out of the house, but my mom stalked Sharon and talked to her. Later, I told Sharon that we should have told you as soon as you got home, but she said we couldn't. Why would she do that? Sharon told me that Mom said you were no longer able to perform your marital duties in bed, so you arranged for that guy to do the job for you. Sharon claimed Mom said that. That's right. I know it sounds a little far-fetched now, but Sharon insisted we couldn't tell you, because if you knew that we knew, you'd be humiliated. So that's why you didn't say anything, of course. I didn't know who I was more angry at, you or Mom. Now I think Sharon might have been involved in it too. You stayed silent for 2 years until you could move out. Yes, now that I think about it. It sounds pretty stupid. Listen, if you want to see a fool, look at me. It must have been going on for nearly 10 years before I found out. I'm the real idiot here. Dad, how did you find out? Your mom was at his house when it caught fire. He died in the accident, and your mother broke her ankle jumping out the window. How did you find out? It's a bit complicated. Let's just say things are starting to make sense now. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know. Don't worry about it. You can make it up to me later. By the way, don't talk to your sister or let her know that I'm aware that I think she's in on all of this with your mother. I'm sure she is. Let me know how I can help. I owe you big time. I had no intention of arguing with my wife about any of it, that I would do what needed to be done and move on. One thing I realized very quickly, there would be no divorce that I flat out refused to give her half of everything just because the state said so. There was no benefit to divorce, especially if I was living abroad, that I decided it was best not to bother Elspeth during her period of mourning. She had lost her lover. It would have been tactless of me to intrude on her emotions at a time like that I quietly chuckled to myself when that thought crossed my mind that in the meantime, I used the time to get all my finances in order that it took less than a week to straighten everything out. The only issue I ran into was with the bank that held the mortgage on the house that I tried to quickly file a quitclaim deed to make the property return process easier for them. They refused and insisted I fulfill my obligations or they'd take me to court. That I just smiled and walked out the door. The realization that my credit would be wrecked didn't seem to bother me at all. In fact, I found it slightly amusing. That it's amazing how much money you can pull together when you really put your mind to it. That I had more than $480,000 with me. For an entire week, I didn't hear a word from either Sharon or Elspeth. That I found that their deliberate efforts to avoid me only strengthened my resolve that I had a passport and enough money to live comfortably for at least 20 years. After that, I'd have to rely on my Social Security benefits, which I'd still be entitled to, or on the generosity of wealthy women. Of course, that second part was more wishful thinking than a solid plan. That I had no trouble finding a small apartment in Colliery, Sardinia. It wasn't far from the city center. But that didn't matter much to me. There were plenty of small shops and restaurants just a few minutes walk away. That I didn't speak any Italian. But surprisingly, I had no real issues communicating. That I was confident things would get easier over time. That I had no idea what made me choose Sardinia, but I was glad I did. After opening a bank account, I applied for a residency permit and then set up a mailbox at one of the nearby shops. Unfortunately, I still felt the need to maintain some ties to the States. The biggest obligation still hanging over me was last year's income tax. That I couldn't afford to risk losing my Social Security benefits because of unpaid taxes. That one lingering pang of guilt and self-doubt would later come back to haunt me. For about 6 months, everything went smoothly. That I managed to gather all the necessary tax documents and file them on time. That I felt relieved when the IRS cashed my check, drawn from my Italian bank account. Life was good, although local shopkeepers and waiters knew my name and my preferences. That I bought a small laptop and enjoyed using the free local Wi-Fi. That I learned to play dominoes and bocce. That I no longer needed my rented mailbox, but I didn't bother to close it. That I figured I'd just wait until the lease expired at the end of the year. The shop was close to my apartment, so checking it once a week was easy. That it was a clear spring day, and the square was bustling with people. That I walked into the postal shop for my weekly check when I heard her voice. "Hi, James. You're hard to find." Elspeth looked good, just a bit older and slightly tired. That I smiled at my wife. I didn't want to seem rude, but I also didn't want her to think I was happy to see her. That it was a complicated situation, one I hadn't expected and certainly hadn't planned for. "You look well." "That I see your ankle has healed." It was a banal comment, and I knew it sounded forced and insincere. That as we stepped out of the shop, I glanced across the square and saw Sharon about 100 meters away. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, like something out of a ridiculous cliché from a 1960s movie. A few steps away from us was a small cafe that we sat at a table in the warm sunlight near the front door. "Would you like a coffee? With cream and no sugar, right?" As she sat down, Elspeth gave a slight smile and nodded to me. She seemed relieved to have received any kind of response at all. That I wasn't sure what she had expected. That I walked into the cafe to place the order, but instead headed straight to the back room. By that time, the owner and I were on fairly good terms, and he seemed to notice that something was going on. That I smiled and pointed toward the outdoor table where Elspeth was sitting. That he looked over, smiled back, and nodded as I slipped out the back door. A few minutes later, I was standing on the second-floor balcony of one of my favorite restaurants, discreetly watching the square. That no one would have noticed me unless they were looking. She waited patiently for a long time, but eventually stood up and went inside. That I can't say for certain, but I think she was crying when she returned. Sharon rushed to her, and they had a brief, emotional exchange. That I waited a few more minutes before heading back to my apartment. They knew about the mailbox, but there was no way they could know. Where I lived, for the next 3 days, I watched them return to the square. Twice a day, they sat and waited, and then it all stopped that I was glad to avoid a confrontation. But I was still concerned about the future, that I suppose. Some people would call me a coward for not wanting to speak with her, that I didn't see it that way. Aside from money, there were two things she might have been after: reconciliation or closure, that I was determined to give her neither. Knew there would be no financial settlement right now. I'm in Bastia, on the island of Corsica. Though it's a French town, the neighborhood I live in is mostly Italian, that I like Sardinia. But I no longer felt comfortable there, that I'm proud of myself for adjusting my lifestyle so that my money will last much longer. Every day, I find new interests, and some of the local women are starting to show me a bit of friendliness. Yes, I'm still technically married, but I figured I have a few years of freedom ahead, that I'm getting older, but I'm not dead, Rob knows. Where I am next summer, he and his family are planning to spend their vacation on the Mediterranean, and I'm looking forward to it. Epilogue. Rob and his family spent Christmas with Elspeth at Sharon's house. Things got a bit heated when Rob accused his sister of deception. That's Sharon's husband. Mark listened to the argument with great interest, and 6 months later, he divorced my daughter. That I wonder why. Elspeth never filed for divorce, that I think she's waiting for me to come back. Rob was more than happy to share the latest updates from his visit. Thank you for being with us. And if you're one of those who watches silently, just leave a like. It helps new stories come to light.